Hey guys, JDR Exospace here. So I stumbled across this story a few days ago, and I know I've been caught up in the Reddit whistleblower story, but I've been wanting to get to this one too. So apparently this Italian researcher who's big into UFOs has come forward claiming to have evidence that Roswell was not our first encounter with UFOs, but rather we have evidence going back to 1933 from Italy, which would predate Roswell by about 14 years. Now, it's important to note this guy has been saying the same thing for about 20 years and claims to have had evidence for that entire time. But David Grusch, U.S. congressional whistleblower, has actually verified this story and says that it's legitimate and that the U.S. actually has craft that we recovered after World War II from Italy, and we've been studying it ever since. And before I get into the story, yes, this is something in the Daily Mail, blah, blah, blah. I'm not interested in having the political conversation. We're going to evaluate the evidence as it stands without the politics. The story goes, a top U.S. intelligence officer claims World War II American forces retrieved a UFO that crashed in Italy in 1933. And Italian researchers say they have the documents to prove it. That U.S. intelligence officer is David Grusch, as we're going to get into further in the story. Former top National Reconnaissance Office staffer David Grusch shocked the world last month when he revealed he had blown the whistle in sworn testimony to Congress and government watchdogs about an alleged secret U.S. program that has obtained multiple non-human flying saucers. Grusch claims one of these alien spacecraft crashed in northern Italy in 1933 and was secreted away by fascist dictator Benito Mussolini before it was captured by American forces at the end of World War II and shipped to the U.S. This is Italian researcher Robert Panotti, who's come forward with this evidence just so you can get a good look at the face. Yeah, we're not really interested in artist impressions because we can't verify any of that. So let's take a look at the gallery before we get further into the story and kind of take a look at some of the evidence that Robert Panotti claims to have brought forward. All right, so this is some of the original handwritten memos that he claims to have. This one actually looks like it's describing the shape of the UFOs. Now that's pretty basic, but this was a sketch, letterhead dated August 22nd, 1936, describing a cylindrical aircraft with portholes on the sides and white and red lights spotted flying over northern Italy. So let's keep going. All right, so this is one of the telegrams he says is legitimate. This is from 1933. So a personal order of the Duce, El Duce being Benito Mussolini, it is disposed immediate arrest, diffusion of news related to aircraft of unknown nature and origin, of which in dispatch of Stefani date today, 7:30 a.m. stop. Immediate recasting of any leads from the newspapers bearing said news is ordered. Stop. Maximum penalties for transgressors are foreseen up to refer to the Supreme Court of State Security. Stop. Immediate confirmation of receipt required. Stop. This telegram says that this is legitimate, is that this order is basically coming from Benito Mussolini himself, saying that all secrecy is required with regard to this recovered craft. Here's a second memo. By personal order again of the Duce, absolute silence is ordered on presumed landing on national soil of unknown aircraft. Stop. Version to publish diffused with today's dispatch by Stefani is confirmed. Same version also for staff and journalists. Stop. Maximum penalties foreseen for transgressors up to deferment to state security. Supreme Court. Stop. Immediate confirmation of receipt requested. Stop. Director Special Affairs ends. Stop. This is the next memo. By superior order, it is disposed to treat news diffused with Stefani's dispatch. Aircraft above recognized as Meteor repeats Meteor by Brera Astronomical Observatory. Stop. Give minimum graphic relevance to news. Stop. No need, repeat. No need to correct. Stop. Minimize. Stop. Immediate confirmation of receipt required. Stop. So essentially what they're saying here, and again, this apparently is coming straight from the top, straight from fascist dictator Benito Mussolini himself, that they're supposed to say that this is a meteor to the public and not give it any more attention than that. This is crazy. If this is real, this is pretty shocking. All right, so there are some other documents here, and I could barely make that out. This was sent to Panotti, referring to a mysterious government department called Gabinetto RS-33. So another interesting thing, we're going to get back into this article, but apparently there was an entire department that was created by this fascist government in Italy right around the lead up to World War II and then through World War II to study these things and try to reverse engineer them. From the mysterious documents, Panotti was able to pinpoint SI, AI, Marchetti, and Vergiati, an aircraft facility near the alleged crash site outside Magenta, a satellite town of Milan, as the likely site where the supposed wreckage was stored. So that's where they kept the aircraft, apparently, in this building, or in this aircraft facility, rather. Here's another memo. They don't have the translation here. If anybody speaks Italian, I'm going to leave this up for a second just so you can read it. So pause the video. If it says anything crazy, let me know. The Italian researcher had one of his documents dated 1936, tested by a forensic expert who concluded that the paper and ink was from that period. So it looks like he's done what he can to actually date this. So it appears that it actually did come from the 1930s, which would make this legitimate. It's hard to believe that someone would have forged this right around the time that this was supposed to have happened and then kept it in a suitcase or something or in their attic for 80 years. Marco Negri, whose family have lived in northern Italy for over a century, said his great-great-grandfather, Pietro Negri, pictured told stories to his father of a strange metallic craft without wings that crashed in Magenta in 1930s. So this is the guy right here who was telling his son at the time about an object that they recovered, a metallic aircraft without wings, so he's telling his family members about it. All right, so back to the story. And this week, Senate Intelligence Committee ranking member Marco Rubio confirmed he has heard testimony from alleged first-hand witnesses of such crash retrieval program. Keep in mind, all of these disclosures so far to Congress have been closed-door, top-secret communication, so we do not know what they're talking about behind closed doors. But we do have several members, Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley, and other representatives that are in these meetings coming forward and saying, it seems like David Grusch is just confirming things we've already heard from other sources. So we really have no idea how many people have come forward, what they're saying behind closed doors. One of the big arguments against David Grusch being a legitimate whistleblower is that he doesn't have any firsthand accounts, but we don't know who they've talked to in these closed door sessions that might be firsthand accounts. It seems like there are a number of them, if some of these senators and congressmen are willing to come forward publicly and say that they've spoken to them. All right, here we go. The documents were mysteriously mailed to Pinotti from an anonymous source who claimed to have inherited them from a family member who worked on Mussolini's supposed UFO program. They include 2 June 1933 telegrams in Italian, one demanding absolute silence over an alleged landing on national soil of unknown aircraft. Another, dated June 13th, threatens the immediate arrest and maximum penalties for any journalist reporting news of an aircraft of unknown nature and origin. Immediate recasting of any leads from the newspapers bearing said news is ordered. Both say they are by personal order of Il Duce, Mussolini himself. Other documents sent to Pinotti refer to a mysterious government department called Gabinetto RS-33, or the RS, Special Research 33 Cabinet, supposedly set up by the Italian dictator to manage the retrieval and study of the alleged saucer wreckage, as well as other UFO incidents. So the only UFO incident that Pinotti is claiming to have direct evidence of is this one crash retrieval. But he's at least making the allegation that this department was created for other aircraft. Now here's the part where I want to step in. So the build up to World War II and during World War II, there were prototype aircraft, I'm sure, all over the place in Western Europe. So it's highly unlikely that UFOs were just crash landing all over the place in Western Europe right around the time of World War II. I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of them were probably just prototype aircraft, in a lead up to a global war. Seems like the most likely explanation there. Pinotti says RS-33 was headed by Nobel Prize winning inventor Guglielmo Marconi, inventor of the radio. So they had it sounds like some legit people running this program, if this is true. To this day, Italian historians and UFO researchers have found no other evidence of the shadowy alleged group or Marconi's involvement. Well, yeah, it'd be kind of hard to find evidence of somebody's involvement in a top secret program if it's top secret. Pinotti was also sent handwritten memos on paper with a government agency letterhead dated August 22nd, 1936, which include a sketch and description of a cylindrical aircraft with portholes on the side and white and red lights spotted flying over northern Italy. So here goes into detail that aircraft facility outside of Magenta in Milan. The site miraculously avoided regular bombing raids by Allied forces during the Second World War, and 12 years later in 1945, the region was secured by US and UK troops. Okay, now this is the part where the story gets interesting because this is where David Grusch comes in. US whistleblower David Grusch claims it was around this time that the supposed craft was shipped back to the US, the first saucer recovery to his knowledge. Now, I know that this story has been in the news in the past, but that's why it's becoming relevant again, because David Grusch has confirmed it. In 1933, a bell-like craft around 10 meters in size was recovered in Magenta, northern Italy. This is David Grusch. It was kept by Mussolini's government until 1944, when it was recovered by agents of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, a former U.S. intelligence agency. He told French newspaper La Parisienne next month. So the OSS, just for background information, it was kind of like the grandfather of all of our U.S. intelligence agencies. It was created around the time of World War II, kind of as like our first kind of espionage agency. He goes on, ironically, it predates anything the public has heard about for decades, such as Roswell. So he actually spoke with the French newspaper La Parisienne, and he didn't confirm that story with Daily Mail, who wrote this particular article. But he says, as the only UFO crash, which Grusch has specifically described as authentic, the alleged 1933 incident has taken on a new significance as an indicator of the reliability of his claims of a U.S. crash retrieval program. Okay, so Roberto Pinotti has at least been able to authenticate some of this paperwork. He said he reached out to a forensic expert who concluded that the paper and ink was from that period. The 1933 telegrams have not been tested. So I don't know how hard it is to get a hold of ink and paper from the 1930s and then recreate a forged document. I'm not saying it's impossible, maybe that's unlikely, I don't know. Not an expert in forensics. Here's the expert, Antonio Garavaglia, shared with Daily Mail, says it can be stated with reasonable certainty that only the sample examined and the subject of the appraisal can be considered original and therefore authentic. After 4 years of investigations and a forensic analysis showing the documents were really written in the 1930s, we published a detailed report in a book. Okay, and I actually found some of the details of that book, and so I'm going to skip over to a different article here. So this is a story, it's a reprint of the book I found on the Black Vault. It's apparently, I guess this guy has a YouTube channel. I've never watched it, but maybe go check it out. But he shows a reprint of some of the things from this book that kind of detail this story. And there were some things I wanted to point out here. So he has some handwritten letterhead that's describing these craft. Here we go. It was observed in the morning, he writes. It was a metallic disc, polished and reflecting light with a length of 10 or 12 meters. 2 fighter aircraft from a nearby Air Force base took off, but were not able to reach it, even traveling at 130 kilometers per hour. Now, that's actually really freaking slow by today's aircraft standards, but it's 1930s. It didn't emit any sound, which would lead one to consider an aerostat or a balloon. But nobody knows of balloons that can fly faster than the wind. I know for sure that it was seen by other pilots. The report arrived in the hands of Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law and Italy's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Then, after approximately an hour and after flying over Mestre, it was seen as a sort of metallic tube, gray or slate in color. A drawing by a confidential informant was redrawn by Andrea, who, as far as the 2 A and B drawings are concerned, explained that A, and here they are right here, A is this kind of looks like an airplane without wings almost, kind of like a 747 or something. A was described as being like a kind of aerial torpedo with very clear windows and with alternating white and red lights. Really sounds like a 747 without wings. B were 2 hats like those used by priests, which are these kind of typical flying saucer shape right here in the end of this letter. They were wide, round with a dome in the center, metallic, and followed the torpedo without changing their relative positions. And as we kind of scroll through some of these documents, we see some of the drawings that were kind of recreated, I guess. And by some accounts, it seems like the fascist Italian government tried to recreate some of these flying saucers. And that's what you're looking at right here. And you could tell this is definitely a recreation by a person trying to make an aircraft for people to fly, because it has all the traditional trappings of a human aircraft. It's got landing wheels and a missile system or some kind of weapon system here. And you would assume that this has some kind of like typical propulsion system if it needs landing gear like this. And then here's another drawing of it. But there appears to be some more documentation in here, copies of telegrams from the prefects of the Kingdom of Italy. And then here is what appears to be like some kind of prototype jet that they flew, the Caproni Campini motor jet, right around the startup of World War II, several years after this aircraft was alleged to have been recovered. So they're making the claim that this was kind of a prototype that was developed from reverse engineering one of these recovered craft. I don't know about the veracity of that. I don't know anything about aircraft. I've never seen the Caproni Campini before, so I don't know anything about that. Okay, so back to our original article here. The evidence speaks for itself, and it shows that the first world leader who officially, although secretly, faced the UFO problem was not President Harry Truman with the Roswell incident in the United States, but Italy's Benito Mussolini. And again, because I always try to look at both sides of the argument here, now we're going to talk about what the skeptics have to say about this story. Skeptics have pointed out that vintage paper and ink from the time could have been used to forge the papers, and that they bear no protocol numbers or official stamps that would help verify them as real government documents, appearing instead to be more like personal memos. Even other Italian UFO researchers have poured scorn on the story. Giuseppe Stilo, a member of the Italian Center for UFO Studies, told Vice News Italy, "From a scientific point of view, these are embarrassing stories. Any historian would blanch at seeing how one claims to prove one thing or the other." British historian Graham Randall, who has written books on World War II UFO sightings, told DailyMail.com that he believes the evidence is inconclusive. "It's one of those cases where we need more information," he said. "There's claims made, but nothing really to back them up. It would be nice if there was an independent examination of the original documents that could rule out or in whether this was a forgery or not." Now, here's an interesting part of the story. The Republic of San Marino, a tiny European city-state on the Italian mainland, is currently working with Pinotti and fellow CUN executive Paolo Guzzardi to lobby the United Nations to set up its own UFO investigations office. The effort, named Project Titan, was approved by the San Marino government on January 19th this year, and Pinotti and Guzzardi had their first meeting with ministers on June 19th. Guzzardi says he wants San Marino to be the headquarters for the proposed UN UFO office, with the goal of making the city the Geneva of UFOs. So some of you may have heard of Lou Elizondo, so he chimed in on this story. "The incident is something we've taken seriously and we're continuing to take seriously," said Lou Elizondo, who helped lead ATIP. Okay, now here's the part of the story where you really have to take it with a grain of salt, because these are just stories passed down from generation to generation, and we really have no way to prove any of the veracity of these claims, okay? One Italian resident near the site shared information with Daily Mail that predates the discovery of Pinotti's controversial documents. Marco Negri, whose family have lived in northern Italy for over a century, said his great-great-grandfather told stories to his father of a strange metallic craft without wings that crashed in Magenta in the 1930s. Marco, 42, said his ancestor Pietro Negri was podesta, or mayor of Verona, from the 1920s through the 1950s, less than 10 miles from Vergiati, where the alleged wreckage was supposedly stored, and about 30 miles from the supposed crash site. My great-great-grandfather Pietro told my father a story about the strange crash in 1933 since he was young. It was a second-hand story told to me by my father when I was a child in the early 1990s, but it matches the story of the crash. I was told a strange metal plane with no wings crashed somewhere between Vergiati and Magenta. I was told there was a big censorship around this crash. The fascist secret police were sent to the surrounding cities to keep people silent about it. Marco, who says he and his family disavow their ancestors' fascist past, added that Pietro's position as head of the town and his police force meant he was able to see telegrams about the crash. Marco said his great-great-grandfather died in the 1950s, and his father and other older family members he told this story to have also passed away, offering no corroboration for the tale. Okay, now here's an interesting tidbit of the story, and again, you have to take all this with a grain of salt because who knows if this is true or not. The Lombardy resident, Marco Negri, said that his great-great-grandfather's story also concluded a wild detail that Pinotti also described, without evidence, that two bodies with blonde hair were found inside the craft. Marco said his ancestor described them as child-sized, whereas in presentations at UFO conferences, Pinotti said they were around 5'9" with light hair and eyes. That kind of sounds like people, doesn't it? Kind of sounds like people you might expect to see somewhere on Western Europe. Light hair, light eyes. Hard to say the veracity of that. Who knows? And then at the end of the story is the typical Department of Defense denial, denial, denial. All right, now here's where I want to wrap the story up. And please don't take this as a personal attack on this guy, Roberto Pinotti, because I don't know who he is. But I do think it's important to discuss a person's credentials. Now, all that being said, I am not one of those credentialist type people that thinks that the only people you can trust are people that have some kind of PhD level expertise in a field, because you absolutely can make yourself an expert through a rigorous study on your own. However, I do think it's important to point out that someone bringing this kind of evidence forward, like what their credentials are and whether or not they have any real study in this field. So I found this biography of Roberto Pinotti, and I assume it's self-authored, but as he describes, in 1972, he obtained a degree in political science applied to sociological sciences at the University of Florence. In 1992, he graduated in business administration and management science at the Higher Institute of Business Management and Economics. And then if we scroll down to the end here, it says Roberto Pinotti is one of the founders of the CUN National UFO Center since 1967. So he's been a UFO guy for like 60 years. Okay, that's an important thing to note. He's also a lover of mystery, esotericism, and symbology, which he disseminates and teaches not only in countless conferences and symposia organized by him, but also through appearances on TV and live on the web. In addition to this, he is a prolific author of essays and fiction and has produced more than 50 titles published by the most important publishing groups such as blah, blah, blah. So this guy doesn't actually have any formal training that I could see in any kind of aerospace. He's not a pilot by what I can see unless it's an amateur. He's not a biologist. So being able to look at claims of like UFOs and aliens, if you don't have any kind of background in that, again, it's not impossible. I'm not a credentialist, but it definitely helps to have a detailed understanding of what you're talking about. But he seems to be, from what I'm looking at, a hobbyist in UFOs that he's been doing it for 60 years. So he's probably very well versed in UFO stories and alien encounters. I don't know how well versed he is on scientific or technical details. Again, don't want to seem like this is an attack on anybody's credentials or character or anything like that. I just think it's important to present all sides of the story and who we're actually talking about here. But that's all I've got for this story. I just wanted to share that with you guys. If this is true, and David Grusch just confirmed that we have UFOs that predate Roswell by 14 years, and we recovered them in Italy, then we've been studying UFOs for a lot longer even than a lot of people think that we have. But we're going to keep following David Grusch and some of his whistleblower claims, and we're going to keep following whatever is happening behind closed doors in Congress, because we're probably going to get just a drip of information out of those meetings. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here, and I will catch you guys on the next one.